Welcome everyone to the next little notes from the rest stop. We're on a journey in life here, and we're taking some time to pause, if you will, kind of see what we're learning, see what we're experiencing along the way, and to consider some of Jesus' stories, to see what he might be wanting to teach us. So tonight we have myself, David Ferreira, and Claire from Portland. We have
me, Randy.
Yes, right. And from Warren, Oregon,
Lamar Friesen, not Kathy F.
Yeah. And from St. Helens,
Michelle Jordan.
Okay. And we just want to kind of start with that idea. What do stories do for you? Someone says, "Hey, I've got a story." What does that first stir up inside of you?
Hope it's a good one.
Okay. All right.
Don't bore me.
All right. So it's like I might like it. I hope it's a good one. That's good. Okay. What were you thinking?
Go ahead.
No, it's all right. Go ahead, Michelle.
It causes me to pause, maybe be curious. It causes me to pause and be curious. Yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of piques that interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. What were you thinking, Randy?
Oh, it definitely gets my attention, and I'm ready to hear. It's like I'm all ears if people say, "Oh, I've got a story." It's like, okay, I was going to leave, but I'll delay because I want to hear your story. Please tell us.
Okay, so that's a pretty good range. Kind of catches our attention, maybe makes us delay our schedule, or maybe kind of is a little intimidating. It's like, ooh, I hope this isn't a long story about something I don't care about. Okay, so some of these stories may not be good. Well, when Jesus starts telling a story, how does that usually hit you? You're coming along. He's known for his parables. What do you find yourself feeling when you come to his?
I see it like he's revealing just a little bit of who he is in this story. And you want to sort of find out, where's the story going to go and what's it going to reveal?
Okay, so you have some curiosity, it sounds like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it kind of sparks in you. How about with you, Michelle? As Jesus tells a story, how do you find yourself reacting?
I'm prepared to be convicted about something that I should change. And then also I'm prepared to learn something more about God himself, because he's very good about showing a part of a characteristic of himself in every story.
Okay, so you're thinking the truck's going to be loaded here, even if it's
yes.
Yes. There's something coming here. If Jesus is talking, it could be a short little story about yeast, but okay. All right. Anything that hits you differently in that regard, Randy? Jesus starts telling a story. What does that do for you?
Honestly, it makes me a little nervous. It's like, am I going to get this or not? I'm going to have to really listen and seek to understand, because I may not get this. And oh boy, I don't know if I can figure this one out.
Okay. It seems like we're probably all talking now as people who have been around his stories. So we've heard them. We know that there's a lot coming. We know we may get convicted. Randy's anticipating being stretched. Lamar's anticipating learning something. So it's kind of like we've heard these stories before. We kind of have some expectation. What we're going to look at now is when Jesus tells a story to people that probably weren't that used to it. And so as he tells a story, that brings up a question in some of the disciples' minds. So does somebody want to read? Let's see. Well, as a little bit of an intro, I noticed in Mark 4:33 that we find Jesus talking in parables a lot. It says, with many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them as much as they could understand. So there's some comfort for Randy. He was speaking as much as they could as they could get. In
Might have
fact,
been a real short day if I'd been there.
yeah. It says he did not say anything to them without using a parable. But when he was alone with his own disciples, he explained everything. So it's an interesting little snippet there. Jesus talked in parables a lot. In fact, as much as they could handle. And then explained some of these to his disciples later. So we've got a lot of stories about life. You got weeds and wheat and yeast, everyday things. Matthew 13, starting at verse 3, we find this story. Who wants to read that for us? Like verses 3 through 9. Familiar one. We're not going to dig too deep into this one tonight, but Lamar, do you want to pick that one up?
Sure. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear.
Told them many things in parables. Let me tell you about a sower. This is a little more complicated parable than some of them. Got 4 different seeds going here, so we've got to, kind of get in track with this. And then he ends it with, he who has ears, let him hear. Curious way to end it. Anybody listening? He who has ears. Longer story. Are you picking anything up? Well, what strikes me is the next verse. Then the disciples come to him, Matthew 13:10, and they ask, why do you speak to the people in parables?
Good question.
What's that?
I said, that's a good question.
Yeah. So obviously we've got different responses to stories, and evidently they did too. Somehow this story sparked some curiosity. Why are you talking in parables? Well, that question sparks a very lengthy response. Okay. It's fairly involved. Here's what he says. The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. Quotes from Isaiah. He says, though, but blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous men longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Now, the question was, why do you speak to them in parables? And now you understand, right? Because Jesus, now that he's explained this, what did you get, or what part didn't you get? What's your first reaction to his explanation?
Huh?
Yeah.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a mouthful.
Yeah.
But since he's going back to Isaiah, he's probably talking about the Israelites.
Okay.
They weren't listening. And here Jesus came and they weren't accepting him as the Messiah.
Hmm.
So they're not seeing and they're not listening to what he's saying and what he's doing.
Yeah, in fact, he
Obviously.
says this is a fulfillment of this prophecy. So you're actually fulfilling this prophecy that talked about seeing but not perceiving, hearing but not really getting it. So why do you speak to them in parables? Well, it looks like so you may not get it. He says, however, to the disciples, blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. I tell you, a lot of righteous people in the past wanted to hear these things. And it's only coming now. They want to see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. But now there's a blessing here. There's something happening here. So I have to ask again, why is he speaking in parables? Why is the communicator wanting to connect people to God, to explain what God is like, and to tell them what the kingdom of God is like, using stories, which he did a lot, even to the point where the disciples are prompted to ask, why do you use parables?
Well, I think it's many different reasons, actually. But one reason I think is because what the things that he's trying to communicate are so precious and so mind blowing that unless a person is open to really hearing, they're going to say no. It can't be that way. So I think what Jesus is partially doing is saying, okay, this is a test. I'll throw this out here. Here's a nugget of truth. Are you open-minded enough to take your preconceived ideas and put them on hold long enough to consider this truth? Because if you are, great. You can dig deeper and you will get it. But if you're not, this is too precious just to waste on people who are going to reject it anyway and only going to hear what they want to hear. And I think that's why he says, if you've got ears and you're going to listen. So that's one reason.
I was thinking too, the rabbis of the time pretty much had a list of do's and don'ts. You got to do this, don't do this, especially on the Sabbath. Then here comes Jesus, and then it's a pretty simple message compared to all the do's and don'ts that was the teaching of the day.
Okay. So he gives a simple story. What are the values? What do we like about stories, and what frustrates us about them? Maybe that'll help us, because Jesus is saying this is a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. There's an important role for this, and yet his response is a little surprising. So go back. What do we like about stories? What good things can they do?
They entertain us, for one thing.
Okay. Capture that attention.
Illustrate a point.
Can bring something clear, Yeah, someone said a parable is a heavenly story. An earthly story with a heavenly meaning.
It can bring down walls and break down barriers and can create a conversation from happening.
Wow. So it can make concepts clear in simple ways and open up that communication. It makes a connection. But what's the downside? Why do they bug us at times? Why do you think even the disciples asked this question? They must have been bugged a little bit. What bugs you about some stories? Or when Jesus says, let me tell you a parable.
It's easy to miss the point. You've got to say, okay, now why did you tell us this? What does it mean?
And are you talking about me? Am I being convicted of something
Yeah.
that I shouldn't have done or should do?
Okay. And that's really the pluses and minuses of this, isn't it? It's an incredible tool for communication, but a frustrating exercise in engagement at times.
Hmm.
There's going to be some stretching, right? Someone can be listening. They hear about a sower. People could respond. What's he talking about? Oh, I don't know. He's talking about some guy in this field. Who cares? Or another can say, I think he's talking about more than farming. And who gets the greater understanding? See, the parable, go ahead, Lamar. What are you thinking?
Well, I just put some grass seed out because I had some bare spots in the yard.
Okay.
So I can really identify with this parable about the sower.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I hope it rains. Okay, we got rain. Then it's like, what are those birds doing over there by that seed? So, so I could really identify with this one as I was reading this. I was just thinking, me putting the seed, like today I was checking it, oh, dang, nothing's growing yet, so hopefully
Yeah.
all this. So I could see God looking over us too, as far as us being the seed and wanting us to take root and to grow.
Wow. Yeah, because we know a sower only sows seed for a reason, right? You weren't taking care of the lawn for no reason. You want to see a difference. You're willing to take the time, sow the seed, shoo away the birds, put in the water, wanting to make a difference. So here's a story about a man out sowing, and the question is, how is it going to go? How's it going to work? What kind of impact is there going to be? And as Jesus tells that story, people are prompted like, wow, why are you telling stories? This is a little bit of a head scratcher. Okay. And so we're left with, here's a guy who's a teacher seeking to communicate in very simple stories, and yet not everybody's getting it.
Well, I have a modern day example to some degree. So on Netflix recently, I started, there's a series called The America You Never Knew Before.
Oh.
And it's by Oliver Stone. It's a documentary. So I thought, well, I'll give it a whirl, and watched the first one. And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting story. He retells the victory of World War II, and basically says the Russians had a lot more to do with it than what our American history books tell us. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So then I watched the second episode, and it was about Harry Truman and the decision to drop the bomb in Japan. And his take on it was, well, he really didn't drop it to stop the war. He dropped it to warn the Russians that we had nuclear capability. And so it really wasn't about Japan. It was all about Russia. And again, I thought, I'm not so sure I get this. And by the third one, I said, I don't think I want to watch anymore. And so the point is, I guess, Jesus is telling us about the kingdom of God, which the people originally, and we all think we already understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to be weighing it against what we perceive to be true. And if it measures up, then we accept it and we say, okay, I'll listen some more. And if it doesn't, well, I'm not gonna pay any more attention to that. And I think that's what part of what Jesus was doing, is saying, look, this kingdom of God, I am the kingdom of God, and I can tell you all about it. But you're going to have to really listen, because it's not anything at all compared to what you think you already know. And if you're only going to weigh it according to what you know, it is so beyond what any of us have ever understood before. You're going to reject it. And so I'm going to tell it in a parable to keep your interest and allow you to dig a little bit further and to see if you are willing to accept what I'm saying as true or not. I don't know what you feel about Oliver Stone, but I'm probably not going to watch the rest of them.
Yeah.
But Oliver Stone is not Jesus. And so there's a difference that is
Well,
here.
that's a good example, though, that the story really forces us to engage, and it's both an invitation and a challenge, because the story has the power to communicate, and it's also got the power to conceal. It communicates to those who want to understand, and it conceals to those who really don't want to honestly confront.
Which is also the Middle East culture. They don't directly come to you and tell you something. They will tell you stories like, I once knew a man who did something and a bad thing happened, and kind of you're supposed to get the hint. Like, that's how their culture is. You're saying, I think also just a bit of culture, being respectful to not be in the face. And
Yeah, it's interesting to me that this question comes up from the disciples at the very parable that talks about how do we receive the word. Because as we get into the parable, we see that it's portraying how messages are received. So it's kind of funny that right then they would say, why are you talking in stories? Well, funny you should ask. Let me tell you, Isaiah talked about whether you were going to just sort of let the sound waves impact your ears, or whether you were going to let this message penetrate your heart. Let him who has ears hear. Are you really listening? Are you really willing to engage? So how are you feeling about Jesus' stories now?
You really need to listen.
Okay. So you're seeing that as an invitation, kind of a challenge. Yeah. Because if these really are earthly stories with a heavenly meaning, then they've got the potential to transport us into heavenly things. Are we going to listen?
Yeah, and I think it all matters as to who the storyteller is. And the fact that we have a chance to learn about what it means to be godly from God in the flesh. That's remarkable. That makes all the difference in the world as to who is actually telling the story. And I think that's critical.
Yeah. He's there. He's come all the way to make something known. And the reality is, it's there in the story to him who has ears, the one who wants to see.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's a good invitation, a good reminder. I mean, we're talking specifically about our, interaction with Jesus' teaching, but it kind of pictures what we're doing with the rest of life. As we're in life now, we're having to make sense out of stuff. How do we make sense out of what's not making sense? There's struggle and confusion. Could God be giving us stories to teach us something? Because there's incredible power here. Even a mustard seed or some yeast has a lesson to teach us. Are we willing to struggle with that? Are we willing to investigate?
And I would add to that, are we willing to listen with clean ears, that is willing to take what we think we know and push pause so that the Holy Spirit can rewrite on our hearts the truth that none of us really has a complete handle on yet.
I was thinking too, what are some things that are keeping us from hearing and from seeing? Are there
Hmm.
worry, fear, doubts, things like that?
Yeah. Well, and Jesus addresses those things, in different teachings, you know. The rich man who says, I've got way too many crops. What am I going to do? Well, your game plan isn't such a good game plan. It sounds great, but it's based on the assumption that you're going to be living a long time.
Mhm.
You've got enough to last you the rest of your life, but that's tonight. Like, whoa. So, I've lately just looking through my devotionals, I'm realizing how often they talk about sufferings. These devotionals mention teachings in difficult times. Not all of them and not all the time, but a lot of them, it's like, why do we need that much? Well, because we need it that much.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's the time of receptivity when stuff is not working. Not that I like it, but there is some hope. Closing thoughts on stories and struggles.
I was just going to ask Michelle, as a fairly new mom, has your experience with Casey just taught you new things that you thought you knew ahead of time, but suddenly all the stories that you've heard about what it means to be a mom now have new meaning?
Yes. Yes, a lot of new meaning. Yes.
But you can't go back.
Oh, I wouldn't want to go back. It's been amazing, but it is definitely a curveball I did not expect. And stretching, we just talked about stretching. It's definitely stretching your worldview.
All right.
I think that's one reason why Jesus is talking in parables is because it's a whole new experience. What he's talking about is so beyond what any of us could really have firsthand knowledge of. And I don't think Jesus is ever frustrated, but I think if he came close to it, it must have been trying to communicate to us what something as drastic as suddenly, having a child, how that changes your world and your perspective, and how humbling that experience is. I think Jesus is wrestling with how do I communicate these truths so that people really get it, and how do I penetrate their preconceived ideas?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's nothing like being a new parent and understanding. Boy, all my rules on parenting, they don't work necessarily. I've got to figure out new stuff here.
Yeah, once you become a parent, you find out how much you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Can you relate to that, Michelle?
Yes.
I think we all can. Yeah.
I have a little 1-year-old worldview that doesn't quite, trying to find a way to explain things to her in a 1-year-old mindset. It's very different.
Yeah.
So we've got the master of the universe showing up to communicate to us. He shows up and tells us stories we can understand, to tell us about things we can barely imagine.
That's it.
And here we are struggling. And sometimes it gets hard.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we going to do with that? What are we going to make of what he has to teach us? Let's thank him for that. Lord, you found a way to come and make known what we so desperately need, and yet it's so far beyond us. And we're bent in so many bad directions. And we've got so many preconceived ideas. And we're tempted to give up at times. Even with stories that are kind of sometimes almost more frustrating than helpful, it seems. Help us to see that you're a good God, teaching us what we really need. And thank you even for these straining times. May they be lessons that we will, in fact, thank you for. Thank you for our time tonight. Amen. Well, thanks for stretching with me. Man, this is
Thanks for having us.
this is great, stretching together.
Thanks, Dave.
All right.
That's nice. All
Okay.
right. Good blessings.
Good to see you guys.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.